What is up, DMV Hoops fans? Welcome to another Bleav in DMV Hoops. I'm your host, Matt Moderno. Joining me today, if you're a college basketball fan at any level, I think you know this guy. We've got Tony Skinn joining us. Tony, you were part of one of, I don't know if you guys like the term Cinderella or not, but one of the underdog stories of college basketball in the NCAA tournament. And you're now the head coach at your alma mater, George Mason. First of all, thank you for coming on. And second of all, congratulations on the gig. That's got to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you for having me on, Matt. And certainly it's been it's been a hell of a ride thus far in the last 6 or 7 months since taking over the program, since taking over and having the chance to be at the helm of my alma mater. It's been unbelievable. It's been a lot of work, but just glad to be in this position.
I think we've done some of your local colleagues on previous episodes here, and the overall trend is that a lot of programs locally on the way up, and I think that's definitely the case for you guys too. And just excited to hear more about that. But first, just a word from our sponsors. We're brought to you by Stateside Vodka and their Surfside hard iced teas, hard lemonades, hard every flavor you can think of. They're all delicious. Also brought to you by BetOnline. It's your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, tennis, UFC, anything you can think of. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head to the website today and use our promo code Bleav, BLEAV, for your 50% off welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, now that we got those out of the way, I just want to kind of get into your background here a little bit and how you got into coaching. Did you know as a player that this was something you wanted to do and a path that you want to pursue?
No, actually, I did not. It's one of those things where, when you're playing professionally, when you're playing overseas, which I was doing, I was going into my 7th and my 8th year. I was at a really good spot as a professional, just coming off the Olympics, which was really, really good for me. And then signing a 2-year deal with a EuroLeague team in Ukraine, Buda Kiev, out of Kiev, Ukraine. And so going into that season, I was really excited because that was just kind of one of those, it was one of those deals where, if you turn the corner, you really have a chance to really play and make some really, really good money at that level in Europe. And so for me, it was kind of an abrupt injury that took place in the Olympics. I had never really been injured before. And so for me, it was just one of those things where, okay, I'll just shake back and, I got to take the year off or half a season off. But you don't really know the extent of what type of injury that you have, which is what I ended up having. It was originally a quad tear, a full quad tear. Yeah. And then that kind of prolonged and led into some other things in the knee. And, as a 6-foot guard, if you're not running circles around everybody, man, you're pretty much useless out there. And so through that transition, through rehab for about, I would say almost a year and some change, my brain really just started to spin a little bit, turning 30, turning 31. It's the first time you realize that, basketball could be gone and you got to start thinking about some other things. And for me, it was just really just volunteering and trying to kill time while I rehabbed. I started coaching locally, at a middle school, charter school in DC, not too far away from where I grew up. And, at the time I was just kind of doing some assisting, some athletic director stuff, just involved in athletics. And coaching wasn't really what I had envisioned.
Yeah, sure.
But one thing led to another. I went to an AU practice and I was like, okay, well, I can do this. And once I started to kind of learn the landscape, it was a little fascinating to me because it was just so much different than what I had experienced. AAU just took it just formed into its own.
Took off.
Yeah, it just kind of took off in a different direction. And I was just so, I was impressed by it and, kind of just jumped into it. And, you fast forward about a year and some change later, Eric Conkle, who I had a good relationship with, he was kind of my guy at George Mason. We always stayed in contact, through those years of me playing. And we never really talked about it. But he gets the job at Louisiana Tech and he calls me to come and join his staff. And that was just kind of, it's kind of like I did my part without really knowing I was doing my part and setting myself up. And that was just kind of the transition for me.
You obviously had your own college coach is a pretty good person, a resource to talk to. Was Coach Larinaga involved at all and helping you kind of get established in the industry at all, or put in a word for you in places like that?
Well, I think it's all part of the same family. Coach Conkle comes from the Coach L tree.
Yep.
And it was indirectly with Coach L, just because, he, we had our conversations, and, he kind of gave me his 2 cents. But, now that I just kind of think back, everybody's path into coaching is different. I get asked all the time, well, how did you get into coaching? Or I see guys asking other people, and it's really hard to say, well, this is the way that you have to get in it. But I think when you have somebody like Jim Larranaga, who's got success behind him, that other people, because of that success, get opportunities. And then under that umbrella, under that tree, it creates other opportunities for guys like myself. And so, yeah, he's always involved some way or the other, whether it's directly or indirectly.
That's pretty cool. As you started your coaching career, was being the head coach at your alma mater on the radar early on? Was that ever something you aspired to, or just sort of this is how it wound out? Like, were you building toward this? I guess walk us through sort of the
I
planning
think,
here.
I'm very, and I've always been like this. I've just always been someone who, I try to remain in the constant as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I always try to tell myself when I got into coaching, I can't remember who it was. It just told me, man, just be the best assistant coach you can be, and just kind of figure everything else out after that. And so for me, I would say this is only going into my 9th year of coaching. Maybe I would say when I started to just kind of hear people say it to me, that's when I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to kind of open my eyes to this thing. But I'm a very firm believer in everything happens for a reason, and it happens at the right time. But just putting yourself in that position, obviously I've been very fortunate in getting roles that just kind of prepared me for this. Working with Coach Conkle, going over there to work with, Kevin Willard over at Seton Hall, getting the chance to go to Columbus to work with Chris Holtman. It was forming into what eventually was me getting an opportunity. But even then, coaching is very, very hard. And to have the opportunity for your first job to be at the A-10 level as a first-time head coach, that's really been a blessing for me. But I wouldn't say I had like this thing where I was like keying in on it. I had a chance to be interviewed the first time around when they originally hired Kim English with the previous athletic director. And for me, that interview, I knew it was a long shot because I kind of felt like they were a little bit further down the road, but the interview was good for me just to prepare, just to kind of get a feel of what that was. And I think after that interview, it was just one of those things where that was kind of where the light bulb kind of hit that, hey, maybe the next interview, will be actually, a real interview, and you just have to be prepared for it.
I got to imagine once you start to hear your names in some of those conversations based on the staffs you worked on, that's like that moment where you're like, oh, okay, like I've got to start thinking about, do I want to take this job? What is the right next job? And obviously there's a lot of ties for you to this area, being from this area. And then, as far back as you go playing in George Mason, was there any other job here on the radar that could have swayed you at all here? Or is this the one that came up and this was like too good to pass up?
No, this was the one. I left Kevin Willard once at Seton Hall. It was a hard leave.
Sure.
But Ohio State opportunity, you don't get those type of jobs and those opportunities. He understood it. He blessed it. And then, the irony of, the basketball gods reconnected us in College Park. And, coming off of an NCAA tournament team, losing to Alabama in the second round, it just kind of gave me this is where I wanted to be, College Park. Me and Kevin Willard, and the rest of that staff, it was just such a good thing we had going. So for me, I was just locked in and trying to get to year 2. So I wasn't looking for any other job. I wasn't even thinking about being a head coach. And, once I started hearing the rumblings of George Mason, it was one of those things where it happened pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
And, I knew that I would have an opportunity just given kind of what kind of had transpired, just 2 years prior. And, obviously Kim did good enough of a job where he moved on, and it kind of created, the opportunity to maybe stay in that lane. And I think that's what leadership decided to do. So
As a Maryland alum, I would like to say thank you for your role in helping get my Terps back where we want to be. But was sad to see you go. Obviously, from our perspective, great to see you move into this position and help kind of bring another program
Always
back
a
to.
Turk.
Yeah,
Always a Turk, man. Always a
Gumne.
Turk.
I love that. Did being back in the DMV for that coaching role kind of help reestablish any ties or relationships you had that you think you can use, here at Mason?
Yeah, I think it, indirectly, yes. I always stayed on ground level in the DMV, always trying to stay connected. I wouldn't say it reestablished any relationships, but it does help when, your recruiting trips now are 20, 30, 40 minutes and
Right.
not necessarily getting on a flight and, being just visible again and things of that nature. I think it definitely, it helped in the sense of, now having to put together the type of roster we had to try to put together in April. It just helped a little bit just because, again, everyone wants to see you win. Everyone wants to help. Everyone wants to support. The beautiful thing about the DMV, there's just so much talent. There's so many good coaches, high school coaches, AAU coaches, and when you've built those type of bonds and relationships, they essentially want to see you win a little bit more than others. And so getting the job, it was an easy transition for me just because I went from College Park to Fairfax. But essentially, it wasn't anything different in kind of what's made me successful just on the recruiting front.
I got you. You helped Mason kind of get to the peak of their prominence as a basketball program, I would say. Final Four is pretty darn good. Hard to beat that. How do you get this program back to where, I think everybody a part of the program thinks it can be, back to being a tournament contender and things like that? Like
Yeah,
what's the blueprint?
I think in all fairness, what we did was, it was amazing. It was historic, and it's really really hard to, as fans, as alumni, the nostalgia is going to always be there, and that's the norm, especially at this level. But I think what people need to understand is how hard it is,
Oh, sure.
to not only make the NCAA tournament, but to win games in the NCAA tournament, and then to turn around and be consistent in doing it in such a good league like the A10.
Hmm.
I think my number one goal for one is to, we got to be able to keep the best players at our level at home from a recruiting standpoint. And then we just have to be consistent in doing so. And I think with that type of talent, with those type of players, you have a chance. And all you can do is ask for having a chance. But obviously, we have to compete our butts off. We have to be consistent in the way we fight and how hard we play. But I do think that given those possibilities of being able to win some of these recruiting battles that, Mason might have lost in the last couple of years or so, I think that does give us the edge. And I do think that just having somewhat of what kind of made us successful, with myself being here, that's not the answer to all of it. But I do think just overall, it gives us a better chance than we've probably had in a long time.
It doesn't hurt to start with a really good returning point guard and Ronald Polite. Honestly, this is a guy that could be A10 player of the year if he has the type of year that I think he's capable of. How did you go about keeping him in Fairfax? Like, I'm assuming that was probably one of your first couple calls. So what's the conversation like? What do you guys talk through in those kind of situations?
Yeah, it was very, he did his research as most point guards do.
I love it.
And I think he was impressed, or I wouldn't even say impressed. He was willing to at least give me a listen.
Mhm.
My hat goes off to him, Dev Dinkins, and also Malik, just because, those guys in this day and age, naturally, they leave. Him and Malik would have been, I'm their fourth coach, or I'm the third coach, I
Third
should say.
coach. Yeah.
And that is very, very rare in this landscape. And so my phone call to him was just like, hey man, listen, the easiest thing to do right now is to leave. It's like you'll get calls from everywhere. But then you're gonna go into a situation where you know nothing about, a coach you know nothing about, a system you know nothing about, a culture you know nothing about. Look around the room here, man. It's an empty locker room, but statistically speaking, production wise, there couldn't be a better person that could take advantage of this current situation. And more than anything, I want you to put your recruiting hat on and think about some local guys that you respect, some guys that you have some relationships with, and let's go build around that. And he's such a good kid, man. It was not a very hard conversation. I didn't walk away from our initial conversation like, man, I got to keep recruiting this kid.
Right.
I was able to focus, but have a few conversations with him, but it wasn't like I was begging him to stay. Like, I kind of felt like he wanted to stay. And that's what he decided to do. And I think that, that him standing down alone is what gave, both Malik and Dev just kind of the same thought process. Like, it's easy to leave and go somewhere, but, this is kind of where, I think that when it's all said and done, this was going to be their best opportunity.
I think that's probably another really good story to tell future recruits too, that, hey, these guys had other opportunities and they wanted to stay here with us. They liked where they were. This says a lot about George Mason as a university. So that's all good for building for the future, I would imagine. And Malik Henry's another good one you mentioned there too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Malik's been a victim a little bit of a really, really good player in Josh Adura. Some people, you look at a kid like that. I remember when I watched film on those guys and I watched some of his clips, I was like, man, this kid is bouncy. This kid's athletic. He has a good body, a good frame. He should have played more. But then I'm like, well, he's playing behind arguably the best big in the league.
Right.
It's hard. And so in all fairness to Malik, man, he's going to have a chance to show that this year. And he's been, one of our hardest workers. He's been one of our best leaders. And I'm excited to just kind of see, his growth and his jump this year.
There's a lot of new faces on this roster too. I got a quote from you here. I don't want to read you back to you, but just for listeners, it says, as with anything you do for the first time, there's some butterflies. Meshing 10 new guys is always challenging, but that's the landscape. That's where everyone is at. And I think that's so true. You look at a lot of the other A10 rosters, 6, 7, 8, new guys. You guys are definitely on the high end of that. Was that just sort of how it lucked out with the way the roster from last year played out and turned over? Or was that some of that intentional on your part to bring in more transfers than freshmen? Like, I guess, walk us through kind of the roster building process.
I think that when I got the job, again, it was easier to get some guys to stay and a little bit harder to do the same. I was confident that with what we had to do, we were going to figure it out. I was very confident in that once I put my staff together. There were a lot of phone conversations that were being had through the hiring process. And in this business, if you're waiting until you get a job to now start putting your roster together, you're done for. You have no chance. And so those conversations were being had, and it was just more so about finding the type of balance and positionally who you could bring in. Obviously, we're having Ronald at your lead guard. You knew that you could kind of focus a little bit around some other positions. And it really just started just kind of like a domino effect of maybe one of the guys that could have came back, went on a visit somewhere else because they were in a visit, but then we brought somebody in and they decided to commit, and we just really chipped away. It wasn't, it was intentional in the number of players,
types of guys you brought in and stuff too.
Well, I would say numbers wise, like we knew we had to get to anywhere between 7 to 9, maybe even 10, depending on who decided to leave and stay. We had a couple guys that just decided to go in a different direction late. And so we were always on the hunt. I think there was room to keep some of those guys. So we just kind of had some flexibility, man. But the more and more we started piecing this thing together, it was more so like, I was glad that we had that cap space, because I really do think that we got better. That's just the honest truth, and that's the business. And sometimes it doesn't always work like that. But we were able to do what we needed to do. And my staff was unbelievable the way that, they hit the ground running, and we were able to get some good pieces that, as nervous as I was after that press conference and then going in my office and, looking at my roster and my depth chart, like, okay, now the honeymoon's over. Like, we got to feel, I want to compete in year one. I don't want to just, go out there and not compete. And we were able to piece this thing together. And I truly believe that we over exceeded in overachieved probably what people would have thought we would have been able to bring in that late and with that number of scholarships.
I think one of the things basketball fans like myself maybe underrate a little bit is just those recruiting relationships and how long those stick around beyond just sort of where the guy initially chooses to go to school. So I would imagine a lot of these guys that ended up transferring in here were people that you had previous relationships with and you were able
Yeah.
to recruit other places, or at least your staff was.
No, absolutely. That was the excitement of getting this job. Was as excited as I was, you know, people that you've built relationships with over time, especially in the DMV, they're just as excited. And some of those people are mom and dads, they're high school coaches, they're AAU coaches, and kid leaves a certain program and you get the job, and it's like, hey man, like what are we doing? And especially when you have those relationships and you kind of gone down this line before, it makes it a little bit easier in the recruiting process to actually win those battles, because these were guys. Some of these guys came from the Power Five, and they were being recruited by the Power Five, and to be able to win those battles, it was a good feeling.
Get old and stay old is something that we hear a lot in college basketball these days. A lot of those transfers that you brought in are older veteran guys. Was that sort of an intentional choice to pick guys that could come in and ready to be ready to help you from day one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I didn't get into this thing to, play make believe as far as what the expectation is. I learned that last year at Maryland.
Right.
We took that job over, and I think a lot of people were just expecting us to, compete and kind of figure things out in year one, just because we didn't have, with the exception of one or two pieces, we weren't very old. We didn't really kill it in the transfer market or in the portal. But we put together a competitive team that, once we got to coaching those guys up, they played their butts off, and, the results showed. I kind of had that same, thought process in piecing this thing together. And yes, I wanted to be older, because if you're going to throw a bunch of new guys out there, man, they better have some sort of, or some sort of understanding of what the expectation is. They've been through the rigor before. These are guys that have been, in college for 3, 4, 5 years. They've been a part of other programs. They know what winning looks like. They know what losing looks like. And, like I said, we were able to get, the right balance of guys that have kind of been through this. And, I wanted to stay away from freshmen as much as possible, but we ended up getting 2 really good freshmen in Austin Ball and Baraka Koji. 2 pieces from a freshman standpoint that, that late, obviously we're able to retain Austin because he had committed to the previous staff, but, it doesn't get any better than those 2 guys bringing them in as freshmen. And then everyone else, like you mentioned, these are guys that have played at least 2 or 3 years in college. And I think that just helps you with your connectivity a little bit more, especially with 10 new guys, well, really 13, because the other 3 haven't played with the other 9 or 10. But just being a little bit older, a little bit wiser, a little bit more experienced, it definitely helps you with your connectivity.
You mentioned some of these guys were originally recruited by Power 5 schools, and they probably all got something to prove. It either didn't work out as well as they would have liked in that first stop. So you're bringing in veteran guys that have something to show everybody. I would imagine that that's making for some pretty competitive battles and letting guys try to earn different spots and earn different minutes. Even just from the get go of practice here.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that you have some guys that drop down, I guess you could say, from the Power 5 level, whatever you want to say. But the A10 is so respected.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, yes, I do got a couple guys that are playing with, a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. You're talking, starters, like guys that started at the Power 5 level. So they're no slouch by any means. Woody Newton started, 75% of his games last year at Oklahoma State. Darius Maddox, prior to this previous season where he had some personal issues, he made almost 63s as a sophomore. And really, you take away some of his personal issues this year, maybe that's 70 or 83. So, you got guys like that were being re-recruited to go back Power 5.
Sure.
And anytime you can get guys like that to come and play in the A10, which is a really, really good league, I'm excited about that.
If I remember correctly, you were a transfer yourself. Does that help you from an insight process, kind of helping these guys acclimate? Or is it so different these days? Like, I guess, I don't know. Is there any leg up there by having gone through that?
Nah, you know what? Yes and no. Yes and no, just from the standpoint of, me transferring, I went to junior college.
Hmm.
I went from one junior college to another. But then my 3 years at Mason, obviously, I started it and I finished it. So it's a little bit different. But I do think that, there is a common denominator here where it's in the day and age that we're in, there's really no excuses because change is normal. That's just what it's become. That's what, in the past you would transfer somewhere and then you'd have to sit out. And so the portal didn't really exist because of that. But now that we're in portal land, I wouldn't say there's any type of, similarities in the way I transferred compared to this, this day and age. And I don't have any junior college guys either. So not a lot of similarities there.
That's fair. One guy we haven't mentioned so far, Jared Billups, transferring in from Siena. That's Chauncey's cousin. And kind of built, bigger, stockier guard like Chauncey. Got a frame to him. Do they play at all similarly? Not to put those kind of expectations.
You know what?
On him,
you learn something new every day because I did not know that.
That's what my research showed. At least if I screwed this one up, you'll have to get back to me and let me know.
Yeah, I mean, you got some recruiting in you, man. Because typically I'm good at this stuff, and obviously I think I might have thought about it maybe once early on in the recruitment, like, hey, his last name's Billups. I wonder if he's related to Chauncey. We never asked, never got to it. He doesn't talk about it, but that's good to know.
Yeah, so food for thought for later.
Then. Yeah, food for thought. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Now it makes sense because he's probably arguably one of the toughest guys we have on this roster.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about him today where it's like he could go, a few minutes, a few possessions without really scoring the basketball. But his presence is always felt.
Yeah, you feel him out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's flying around out there defensively. He's built like a cornerback. He's talking. He's getting at it on both ends of the floor. We live off deflections, and I was just telling one of the coaches might have said like, Jared's got 7 deflections, like 20 or 30 minutes into practice. And I was like, yeah, Jared, that's not the guy that I'm going to be worried about at halftime because we'll chart deflections and we'll go in there at halftime and kind of look at that as the barometer of who's active and who's not. It's also a barometer for me to choose somebody out that's out there just doing absolutely nothing. But Jared Billups is the guy I'm not worried about at halftime because of how hard he plays and his competitive spirit. But yeah, he's, Chauncey Billups was that big point guard. Obviously, Jared isn't playing the point, but he's got the same toughness. He's got the same mindset that I think that, that last name definitely resembles.
I like that. If I screw that one up, I'm going to feel bad about it, but I'm glad there's at least some similarities there. One of the common themes we've mentioned here a little bit with a lot of your personnel is athletic guys, physical. I think that seems like something you intentionally tried to recruit for with the portal here. Was that an emphasis for you all?
Yeah, it was. It was with the way I want to play, the way I want to defend. We're going to press. You've got to have some athleticism out there. You've got to have some length. You've got to have some twitch. And we catered and recruited to that. Obviously, once we started piecing this thing together a little bit more and more, we were being a little bit more just catering to like kind of what the fit was. There was a need initially, obviously, with, that many scholarships.
Sure.
But once we got a little bit better and filled those numbers out, it became more of a fit. And getting guys like Jared, getting guys like Nico from Central Michigan, getting Baraka, who's a fast twitch guy, even Trey Wood, who's been in college for 5 years, but he's dynamically like fast. Getting guys like that, we were catering towards, what we want to do offensively and defensively, which is getting after it.
I think that also, offensively, you mentioned that it's probably a lot of finishers and transition, and there's somebody for Ronald to be setting up as you run secondary break and things like that. I would say the one question mark, and maybe not for you guys seeing them every day, but from the outside looking in, is maybe the perimeter shooting. Are there any guys that maybe didn't hit a ton of threes in their last college stop, but you've already been impressed by like, oh, this guy is going to be a much better shooter than the numbers have told so far?
Yeah, I mean, got to give some credit to some of these guys that I haven't mentioned. Keyshawn Hall is a kid that we got from UNLV, who was playing at, 280 plus pounds. He's a completely different looking human being now. He's down to 230, maybe even 225. I'm trying to get him back to 230 because, he's such a physical combo forward that can play on the perimeter and play around the rim. I'm trying to just tell him, listen, I need you with some shoulder pads so you can go down there and not get hurt. And so, he's a kid that made, he didn't take a ton, but he made 10 out of 23s in the minutes that he played as a freshman. So if he was as efficient as you're going to be, given his field goal attempts from three, and through the summer, up until, our second week of practice now, he's right up there with some of our better shooters.
That's great.
He can really shoot the basketball, especially at his position, having somebody who can be a threat, both inside and out. It's been, I've been impressed. I would say for sure, he's a guy to look out for. And Austin Ball can really shoot it. He's a guy when he's got his feet set and he has the time and space, like it's money ball. Devin Dickens has shown, in practice and some of our drills that he can really, really shoot the ball. And so I think from a perimeter standpoint, it's about just kind of getting these guys in their spots, getting them playing with confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously Darius Maddox is going to be a guy that can stretch the floor. Amari Kelly, he's a combo, 5-man that can potentially play a 4. He's up there knocking some shots down. Again, you're talking about guys that, are green light shooters, but some guys that are, yellow light shooters, time and space, they have the opportunity to shoot and make those shots.
Yeah, you just need a couple guys to give you just enough room to do the other things you want to do. And even if you can piece that together with whoever's hot on a particular night, I think it allows you to go out and do the defensive stuff that you want to get done there too. I have seen some predictions that have you guys in the bottom half of the A10.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at this roster, I don't really see how personally, just given some of the names we've already talked about there. Is that something you guys pay attention to at all, other than just for bulletin board material?
Nah, for me, that I'm gonna set the tone with what the expectation is in that locker room.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, all that stuff is nice and fancy, and it's cool for the people that write it and predict it, and gather all their information, however which way they gather their information. But my biggest thing is for my team and those guys, man, control what you can. Control what you can. Go out there and fight. Go out there and compete. And a lot of times that stuff takes care of itself. So for me, it's not. I'm glad that we were picked there, I guess you could say. Because I don't think a lot of people really know what this team is and how it was built. But that's neither here or there, and we'll just kind of have to see how that plays out.
It's probably something a little fun to being able to prove everybody wrong too. I'm sure that's something the kids can get behind.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's the norm. You hear about it all the time, and the amount of times that 13th team or that 12th team ends up over exceeding. No one ever talks about that.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I'm concerned, that just puts a lot more pressure on some other folks than it does, George Mason.
Yep, like that. One person we haven't mentioned, we talked a little bit about your staff here, but Lamar Butler is also with you. How is that to just have somebody? I'm sure you've known him for even longer than you guys were at Mason together. I can imagine you probably played in similar circles growing up too. Like, what's that like to have somebody with that kind of track record, a friendship?
It's been great, man. It's been all part of it, man. Sometimes things just move so fast, and you don't get a chance to really take it in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find the days to reflect on different things, but I think one of the most satisfying things is really just having a chance to, Lamar kind of set himself up. He put himself in position. He was at Paul VI the last couple of years at St. John's prior there, and coaching AAU as well. And so he's been as tied in the grassroots as anybody else. And so when I got this opportunity, as I was trying to put my staff together, I knew I was going to have a place for him, which is what I know he was working towards. And so anytime that you're able to create that opportunity for somebody, let alone somebody that you went to war with that represents the university, it's definitely been a blessing to just kind of see him working alongside with him and just kind of see him get, his foot in the door and really learning and growing in his role. And, he's been remarkable in his role.
You're kind of more than just a basketball coach in your role. You're also the CEO of an organization here, essentially, and getting boosters excited and alums excited. Big part of the job. And I would imagine that's probably easier to do given the track record that you and somebody like Lamar have, with the organization.
Yeah, no, that's been, every time I go somewhere and I run into somebody, man, and, they're like, it's like the same question, like, hey, man, how's it been, man, now that you're, in that first seat, and at George Mason, I said, listen, man, I would hate to be anybody else that's going somewhere else for their first job. And, selling a place, it sounds good when you're selling that place because you're trying to recruit a kid, but you don't really know that place. And so being here at George Mason, it's been tremendous just because, like you said, that same support system, those same alumni, those same faces are still here. And it's made my transition so much easier. And really just one less thing to have to sweat about for my first job, because this is home. Those people are still here, and it's always good to see familiar faces, and makes it a little bit easier to just kind of focus on some of the more necessary things, because at the end of the day, that everybody just wants to see, you successful.
You're a person too, so having to come to a new place, you've got a family life and all these things and a personal life to deal with. So not having to learn a totally new area, I'm sure it just saves you a lot of time to focus on the stuff that's really important to you.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome, man. Just I did buy a house when we got to Maryland because I wanted to take my time, and that was one of the best decisions I've made. Now that I'm able to come to George Mason, I was able to get out of that and just transition right on over to Fairfax. And so it's been smooth, man. It's been really smooth.
That's great. We mentioned the Olympics early on. You were one of 2 African-born head coaches in Division I college hoops. You're born in Nigeria, played for the Nigerian Olympic team. That's also a program that's looking pretty good for the future. Have you had any talks with them about being involved at all moving forward?
Oh yeah, I'm actively involved with the Nigerian Federation.
Okay,
I've been asked to coach, over the years. It's just been logistically very difficult for me because I've transitioned now 3 straight years from Seton to Columbus, from Columbus to Maryland, and Maryland to College Park. So it's been difficult. I'm on a group chat with about 30 plus guys that, played together on the last, it was now, I guess now it's the last, because I went at 12, 16, they postponed 20. I guess the last 2 or 3 Olympic teams now, just a bunch of different guys that are, either retired or still playing currently at a high level in Europe, or even a couple guys in the NBA. And so we have these conversations all the time. I think if the right situation came up and it fit, it fit with my schedule, it's something that I would definitely love to be a part of. But I am indirectly still a part of it.
That's awesome. Also, another fun fact here that your athletic comps department are proud of, so shout out Mark for the intel here. You're the only school in the country with head coach and AD that both played in a Final Four, you and Marvin Lewis, who he played at Georgia Tech. Is that something that kind of bonds you guys together, having that kind of experience of what it could look like, or have you even talked about that with him?
No, it is. It's really it's pretty cool, man. I've known Marvin now for decades, because he played at Montrose Christian. I played at Tacoma Academy, and so we actually played and competed against each other.
Oh, cool.
We've known each other through the business. I had a chance to interview at Georgia Tech when he was down there, and just to see this kind of full circle, it's made everything so smooth from a transition standpoint. Just because when you have an athletic director that gets it, that's a basketball guy. A lot of conversations are just so easy to just get through. And yes, it makes, Marvin, most people might not remember or might not know. Marvin was a really, really good player on a team that almost won a national championship. He's a really, really good shooter. And, anytime that you have that, kind of that connection, it's definitely special. And I'd love to challenge any college coach in the country, any athletic director in the country. If they want to get a little 2-on-2 going, man, I'll put my money where my mouth is with my athletic director.
I would not bet against you guys. I think that's a pretty good call there. I really rooted for you guys in that Final Four run, just as a local team, even as a Maryland alum, especially against that UConn team for whatever reason. They were just sort of like the bullies on the block to root against. Not to focus on the negative part of this, I guess, but does it make it worse to lose to the team that eventually wins, or knowing that Florida went on to win back-to-back, does that make it a little easier to say, like, all right, they were just kind of a really
it doesn't make it any easier, man, because as I look back at it, I think they still feel like we could beat them. Yep. It was they were the better team that night, but that's the NCAA tournament. But it does feel good to just know, again, you look at if you look at that Final Four and you look at the other side of the bracket, I Bleav it was UCLA and LSU. And, that was like a complete, I think it was like a blowout in that game.
Yeah.
And then I think that the championship game our year was also then a blowout. So it's one of those things where, you can't control some of those outcomes, but I think we were a possession or two away from turning the game back into kind of where we wanted it from a pressure standpoint. But credit to them, man. They didn't, there's a reason why they won 2 in a row. There's a reason why they've got, there's still 1 or 2 guys that was on that team that's still playing in the NBA. They were that good. They were that well coached. But everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. And that was kind of our fate. And, we weren't supposed to be there. And so to have, to look back at it and say, we were 12 minutes away from winning a national championship, or at least having a chance, you can't ask for more than that.
I think from an outsider perspective here, it seems like there's a reasonable amount of luck involved with some of this stuff. You need the right matchup sometimes, the right health, just honestly, the NCAA committee sometimes to pick you based on a resume that's, you never know where you fit in. There were people that said maybe you guys shouldn't have even made it that year, and then look how far you went. So do you ever think about that as a coach at all? Just sometimes you need certain breaks along the way. Like someone like Coach Larinaga, he probably wasn't a better coach a month after that tournament than he was a month before, but everybody looks at him so differently.
Yeah, no, I think that we had a lot of haters. We had a lot of schools that didn't think we deserved it, but that's what it is every single year. You get some teams that should have been in the NCAA tournament. That choice of that committee, that's just completely up to them and how they kind of pick those teams. And we were a really, really good team that year. Some people forget, yes, the CAA was a 1-bid league, but we were top 25 for several weeks. And we had a chance to go on the road back then when, the bracket busters was a thing. It was the battle of the mid-majors. That doesn't even exist anymore. But we went to a Wichita State team that doesn't lose very much in their backyard.
Sure.
That atmosphere was just as good as any other atmosphere I've ever been a part of. And to go in there and get that win, I think that just showed the type of team that we were. We didn't have a great weekend in the tournament, in our conference tournament, but, that's what happens. But from a statistical standpoint, we were one of the best teams defensively. And so I think the NCAA, they look at those things. And while the average fan might be, uneasy or unhappy about, who's picked and why they were picked, I think when we were picked and we went out there and competed, we showed why we belonged in the NCAA tournament. And so I would say for, the 2006 year, the committee made the right decision.
Yeah, you proved them right for that one for sure. I think that's a cool thing about the A10 too for you guys is you might have an off year as a league every once in a while where maybe it is only one big league just because some things don't break the right way. But I can't imagine that happens very often. So you're not totally reliant on winning that tournament. Like if you are one of the best 4 teams in that league, you got a good shot at, playing in the NCAA tournament. Is that kind of a nice perk of going somewhere like this? Granted, you've also got to play a lot tougher people every week too.
Yeah. It's a different, it's a different league, man. And, the A10 has always been historically a multi-bid league, multiple teams, 3, 4. I think even one year there was talk of 5 teams getting in.
Yep.
And so like you said, it's just a little bit of, if you look at last year where, it was just one team, you're probably talking, maybe 10, 15 point difference collectively of it being now 2 teams, maybe even 3 teams. And so that's just what college basketball has become. And I think that, with the amount of new coaches that are experienced in this league, obviously with the exception of myself, I think you have a chance to see the A10 be what it was before. This is as strong as I think as I look at some of the rosters. I'm now starting to study the league. There's some really, really good players in this league. And hopefully with scheduling and a little bit of luck, we're able to kind of get back to what I think everybody expects the A10 to be.
That's great. Your Mason team that made the Final Four run, was there any one thing from that team that you guys just seemed to gel at the right time and really fit together? Is there any kind of guiding principle that you've taken from that experience that you kind of put into what you look for in a roster and how you build a roster?
Yeah, it's obviously a competitive spirit that you have to have collectively. But even within that competitive spirit, the sense of togetherness was something that we had that I just know it was a huge piece of who we were. And I always give him credit. Gabe Norwood, who was kind of like our sixth man, stepping in my place when I, had to sit against Michigan State in that first round game. A guy who could have easily stepped in. He saved the day. He could have easily gone in the game too, against North Carolina, just been like, man, we just made history, man. Who cares about T-Skin? Gabe Norwood didn't do that. Gabe Norwood sprinted into the locker room and wrote, Tony is back. And to this day, that's who he was as a person. It wasn't just that game. He's been always like that. But that type of togetherness is what made us who we were. Because we all had moments through the season where we all had to kind of sacrifice something. And that's something that I'm just trying to get my guys to understand that, sometimes it's you, sometimes it's me, but it's always us at the end of the day. And any good team is going to have multiple guys that step up on different nights. And, I think we're starting to buy into that, day by day here at George Mason.
That seems like a great takeaway, given the roster that we already talked about here. There's a lot of guys there that are capable, and just knowing that they're going to all get opportunities is probably a thing that everybody needs to hear every once in a while. Just kind of shifting gears here a little bit. We talked about your pro career here a little bit. I think everybody that's played overseas has at least a couple of good stories. Do you have one good overseas story you'd be willing to share with us?
Every time I get asked this question, I'm like, I need to just have one story ready.
You gotta have a go-to. Yeah.
So I can be consistent, man. But I mean, I had so many really, really good memories. I played my first 3 years. I played in France. That was a really, really good experience. And I had a chance to go to, Italy, Germany, Israel. For entertainment purposes, I'm just trying to think what's a good story to. Man, I had so many. Well, I played in Israel. One of my favorite countries that I played in. Actually, I played in Ashkelon, which is Israel's not a very big country, and Ashkelon is at the north of Israel, very, very close to the Gaza Strip. And if you know anything about that side of the world, you know that the Gaza Strip is basically like an invisible wall that separates basically two countries. And when I got there were these rooms in our apartments, and I say our apartments, the Americans, and it was like a safe room, and they didn't really give us instructions on what to do with these safe rooms. And so I just remember sitting in my apartment one day, and then I heard these alarms. And the alarms was like really, really, really loud.
Sure.
And, I called my teammates. No one's picking up the phone. I'm kind of freaking out a little bit. And I end up just going on the internet. This is right around the time that Google started answering everything for everybody.
Nice.
And I just remember just Googling it. And it was basically like, that's the sirens when, there's some, rocket warfare going back and forth. And you're supposed to go into your safe room. Again, we were very, very close to the strip. And, in my mind, I started freaking out. You read the news and you watch TV from the States and you read all these things. You're like, oh, wait a minute, what's going on? And I just remember just going in the safe room, and the sirens was probably only like 5 or 10 minutes, but I think I might have stayed in there like 30 minutes just to be sure.
Sure.
And, just kind of coming out of there. And then, I think I went straight to my gym, and, here are my Israeli teammates. They're just like in there shooting around like nothing ever happened. And I explained to them what had happened, and they're like, "Oh man, it's nothing. Just keep on keeping on." I'm like, "Yeah, that's not really what Google says." But that was an interesting experience. But nevertheless, I mean, I've had so many, man. I've had so many. My time in all those countries, and some of the people that I played with, it was definitely. It was a good experience.
I asked Jerome Dyson for any other local basketball fans that remember Jerome that played.
Yeah, I remember Jerome Dyson. Yeah,
yeah. He told almost that exact same story about he was eating a meal and the sirens went off and he just dropped everything and ran, and everyone else stayed at the restaurant on the beach and kept doing their thing and
that
down in the bunker.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Pretty funny. If someone is listening to this and has never been to a Georgia Mason game before, what's the sales pitch? What are they missing out on by not having come seen you guys play in the past and come to see you guys in the future?
Yeah, no, I think the goal is to, we obviously want to bring excitement back to Eagle Bank Arena. I think we have the potential to turn this thing into, I wouldn't even say what it once was, but I think part of the reason we were successful is because we had the support. And Mason's really become, it's just become a different university than it was when we were here. And I just feel as though our guys that are busting their butts every single day, they need that support. And with the type of talent that we've put together, I think people are going to be very, very surprised at how hard we play and the tenacity that we play with. And I'm just hoping that people just can come out and support. It's Fairfax, man. This is a non-football school, and basketball is it. And we've got a 10,000 seat arena. We'd love to fill that out. And just our guys are going to play hard. They're going to be consistent. They're going to fight. There's never been a better time to become a George Mason Patriot because I think we got something going.
I love that. I mean, I think it's early for folks to get in here on the Tony Skinn, George Mason bandwagon, and this is the right time to do it. You guys can say you're getting on the ground floor. So if you're listening to this, make sure you get out to a game. I definitely plan on doing that this season. Tony, last question I got for you. Is there anything you can tell us about you that maybe people don't know off the court, a guilty pleasure TV show or music artist or any of that kind of thing?
Oh, man. Anything interesting? I don't think I'm a very interesting person outside of being just a dad and a basketball coach. It's a good one. I'm an avid tea drinker.
Oh, there you go. What kind of tea?
Any tea, Moroccan mint,
Okay.
black tea. I like to put some honey in my tea, put some lemon in there. But I drink probably 3 or 4 cups of tea every single day.
Wow. Okay.
But I don't think that's very interesting.
As much yelling as you guys have to do over loud opposing crowds and stuff, I'm sure the tea comes in handy so you can actually talk the next day.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, it's probably, I don't know. It's not really much. I'm a pretty boring guy.
I love that, man. Just keep kicking ass on the basketball court. I think that's a pretty good thing to focus a lot of time on.
No, absolutely.
Tony, anybody you want to shout out here that maybe doesn't get the credit they deserve with the program and the work that they do, that this is an opportunity to give them a little love?
Oh man, who am I allowed to shout out is the question.
Anybody you want.
These things get tricky sometimes with who you can acknowledge and who you can't. No, I think I would like to just, from an overall umbrella, man, I would like to say to my players, that I am thankful for those guys. Those guys made a commitment to jumping on board with, when you go against these other coaches in a recruiting battle, the easiest thing to say is, why would you want to go play for that guy? He's never done it before. There's a lot of uncertainty. So for my players, for starters, I'm thankful for those guys because we're gonna go to war together. And that level of commitment that they gave me from day one is something that, I'm always going to remember. And then, my staff, man, has been, my complete staff. They've been remarkable, putting that staff together, that high level, that experience coming from the places that they came from. Typically you don't, because getting good coaches is like recruiting. You got to be able to sell them on leaving certain places that, Steve Kerr left St. Bonaventure, for Christ's sake, a program that's been really, really successful. Mike Econom was, on his way to an NCAA tournament team of a program because he did really well at Sam Houston State. And then Coach Lou, he was up there and at UMass Lawal, and, they were very, very successful. And so being able to piece that together, I got to say shout out to my staff and, shout out to admin. Marvin's been very, very supportive. Dr. Washington has been very, very supportive. He was actually the one that hired me. And so, hopefully I didn't leave anyone else off that list.
This is not a comprehensive list for anyone who didn't hear their name there. Just nice to give those guys.
And shout out to Mark LaFrance, man. I can't leave out Mark for these wonderful 9:30 podcasts that I thought I had.
I certainly appreciate Mark, so I was going to shout him out regardless. So if he's listening to this, thank him for me when you talk to him next.
Yeah,
Tony,
no
this
doubt.
has been great. You've been so generous with your time. I really appreciate you doing this. I wish you guys nothing but this most success here this year and for all the years down the road. And all us DMV fans will be rooting for you guys.
No, man, this was awesome, man. This is probably one of my favorite interviews I've done thus far, man.
Great.
You were awesome with the questions, and this was just an easy flowing conversation. So I'd love to any other time, and I'd love to come back and do a show, man. I appreciate you for having me on.
We will definitely take you up on that then.
Yeah, no doubt.
Thank you again, everybody, for listening to this too. Rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. We're brought to you by betonline.ag, and we will catch you all next time.